Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
All right. Good morning, Joel. Thank you for joining me today.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, I've been following your work for over a decade, and I just love your ability to do some good storytelling and what you're doing out at Polyface. And there's going to be a lot of people that are listening to this conversation that maybe have never found your work or know who you are. So I'd love to do a little introduction as to who you are, how you got to what you're doing, but then we can go into some of the history of centralized versus decentralized, because that's a big subject that I have been fascinated with, to see how we got here as a country. And we're in some great danger, it seems. And you're doing a lot of work on the front end with securing the food system. So yeah, maybe you could just give a little introduction to how you got into what you're doing. Your genius father, you seem to be a genius yourself. So here we go.
Yeah. So I guess we could go back to my grandfather. My dad's dad was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine when it first came out in 1945, something like that. And so my dad got his kind of non-chemical compost, if you will, bent from him. And after World War II, GI Bill, business economics and stuff, Dad was, well, I want to farm. Where do I go? And I'm a Midwestern kid with no land and no money. How do you start farming? And he was always a visionary, ready for the next big thing. And so he was looking at South America. After World War II, there was a lot of activity in South America. A lot of the Germans, the Nazis actually went down to Brazil and Argentina and stuff. And so he started looking at South America. I mean, not that my dad was a Nazi, but there was just a lot of activity and exploration there in that area at that time. And so he got on as a bilingual accountant with Texas Oil Company in Venezuela. And in 7 years was able to save enough money to buy a 1,000 acre farm in the highlands, uplands of Venezuela, and started farming, got married and had two of us, my older brother and myself. And we very quickly took over the local chicken market because our chickens were so much cleaner than the indigenous ones. And of course, the neighbors, the other farmers, accused us of being practicing witchcraft and voodoo, because that was the only way you could have chickens that clean. And to make a long story short, in 1960, 59 and 60, there was a junta, a coup d'état. And when you have lawlessness, it allows a chance for scores to be settled that wouldn't be settled in other times. And so we were out there living on the farm, very vulnerable. And basically the machine guns came in the back door as we fled the front door. And we came back. We stayed for another 8 months trying to get protection. Nobody would give us the time of day. So the only thing to do was to come back to the States. Dad was 39 and lost everything, and came back to the States. Landed 1961, Easter Sunday, 1961, and he still wanted to go back. I mean, his heart was there, his equity was there, and so we didn't go back to the Midwest where families were from. We settled here, 3 hours from D.C., so that if things changed, we could get to the Venezuelan embassy, sign papers, and be back on the farm. And that never happened, but that's why we ended up here in Virginia, Shenandoah Valley, on the most eroded, gullied rock pile of a property that we could find. It was very, very cheap, and started over in 1961. So the first question was, well, we've got this small farm here. How do we make a living on this farm? And so during my early, I can remember as a 5, 6, 7-year-old having these experts come, both private and government, and giving advice. And it was all use chemicals, plant corn, build silos, feedlots, borrow more money, graze the woods. And of course, Dad knew that none of that was fit his convictions. And he saw the chemical approach as kind of a a rat wheel, that you can't, a rat race that you can't get ahead of. And so he took a job in town. Mom started working as a school teacher again, and the off-farm jobs paid for the mortgage, and the farm was kind of put into a 20-year glorified homestead experimentation process. So I grew up with Dad's all these fantastic experiments and things, from composting to portable infrastructure to direct marketing, all these things. And so now I'm coming up. I'm a teenager. Well, I want to farm full time. How do I do it? And so I'm having the same questions. And I got my first chickens when I was 10. Sold eggs, had a big garden, sold vegetables at a kind of a community market thing in town that was started during the Depression, called the Curb Market. And so I got my feet wet with direct marketing, realized the income potential with direct marketing, and then went to college and shut that down. Came home and got on to the local newspaper, and married Teresa, who was more frugal than I was, and between the two of us, we fixed up an attic apartment, lived on about $300 or $400 a month, drove a $50 car, didn't have a TV, still don't have a TV, and we grew all of our own food, had our own meat, milk, and I was able to save half of my salary because we were living so frugally. So in a couple and a half years, we were able to save enough to live for 1 year, without an income. And so September 24, 1982, I walked out of that newspaper office, and we didn't really think we'd make it. We were afraid you probably run through it, but we did make it. And it took about 3 years before we could exhale, but we were finally able to exhale and say, okay, we're going to make it. And gradually added additional enterprises and customers and different things. And today the farm supports about 22 full-time salaries, and we ship nationwide, and service urban drop points, restaurants, on-farm store, do events, have a full formal apprenticeship stewardship training program, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it's incredible. What was your dad's ability to get resources to learn all of this at that time? And how did you and him start to learn this way of farming and thinking?
So both of us, I would say most of our education actually at that time came through books. And so, my favorite books still on the shelf are, the original old 1950s books that he actually had in Venezuela. The Complete Book of Composting, which was a Rodale book. It's 1,200 pages. It's a massive, massive book.
Mm.
He got a hold of Andre Voisin stuff, the Frenchman who did grass productivity and started. He coined the term rational grazing, which so you ration it out. You don't just put the cows out on a given spot, and then the other thing was just a lot of mobile modular infrastructure. One of my most I say we got most from books, but one of my most poignant childhood memories. I don't know how old I was, 6, 7 maybe. Dad said, let's go. I want to go visit this farm. I don't remember how far. On a Sunday afternoon, we took this drive. I don't remember where it was. Don't remember how far away it was. I mean, it was an hour and a half or so, I'm sure, away. And all I remember was coming home and Dad virtually levitating. He's driving the car and he's just euphoric over this idea of portable infrastructure. This farmer, I don't remember what he had. I don't know if it was pigs, lambs, cows, chickens. I don't know what it was, but he had portable little movable shelters. And the idea of portable shelters, portable infrastructure, just completely captivated Dad's attention. And so by 1969, he had built a 1,000 square foot, he and us boys, had built a 1,000 square foot portable loafing shelter, like a portable tree for cow shade, and it was fantastic. It was a critical part of our early fertility development because we could say, today, cows, I want you to poop right here, and so we could take a section of dewberry vines and thorns and brambles, and next year it was clover, because of the manure, the urine, and the impaction of the one day
Mm.
impaction. And so, we milked a couple cows, and so he did a portable veal barn to let calves jump out and nurse the cows, to milk them and sell veal. That was a fascinating thing. My brother had rabbits, and we tried portable shelters there, but they didn't work because the rabbits kept digging out. We couldn't figure out how to stop that. So when my chicken operation expanded, we just repurposed those rabbit runs for chicken shelters, and that was basically the beginning of the pastured poultry thing that is still our kind of our signature deal. And so that was it was partly books, it was partly observation, it was partly experimentation, and then just time. Remember, I mean, I'm not saying we did this for 2 years. We were here. I came home in '82, so we'd been here for 21 years before I returned to the farm full time. Well, that's a lot of time to do a lot of experiments, and observe a lot of things. And so, that's where we were. Mm-hmm.
And how was his view of freedom, libertarianism, things like that, as far as its imprint on you? And what was his view on where things have gone today? Did he see that coming? Is that what the vision
Yeah.
was and the
Well,
mission was?
yeah. Well, one of the reasons he wanted to go to Venezuela at that time was because, in the late 1940s, or post World War II, a lot of people don't realize how much socialism was creeping into our colleges at that time. I mean, and our political system. That's when Ayn Rand wrote Atlas Shrugged, which is still, an iconic, libertarian treatise, if you will. But
Hmm.
that was written in response to this burgeoning socialist, communist. Oh wow, aren't these communists cool? Kind of thinking in our country back in the late 19 post World War II. And so Dad saw that creep in the U.S. and said, "Man, I want to go where there's free markets and small government." And so, so the developing countries, the problem, I mean, what they have in spades is they have very little regulation. The problem is that the governments are very fragile and prone to prone to corruption and juntas and rebellion and things like that. But it truly is a free market. You don't have to get permission to butcher chickens and sell them to your neighbor in these countries, and you don't even have to in communist China either. So he saw that that regulatory creep at that time, and that was one of his draws to go to South America. So I'll tell you a story I don't tell very often, but you've asked for it, and so I'll give it to you. So we had already left the farm, and we already had tickets to come back on a merchant marine vessel with a couple barrels of possessions. And Drew Pearson, nobody knows that name anymore, but he was the father-in-law of Jack Anderson, the famous journalist muckraker. So this would have been like Drew Pearson in his day would have been like a Tucker Carlson today, and or a Bill O'Reilly, or Sean Hannity. All right. So imagine. So he goes to Venezuela. Remember, the U.S. is giving them all sorts of foreign aid to prop up the government, and telling everyone, oh, Venezuela's our friend. They're taking care of Americans, and da da da. And so Dad got an audience with him and his entourage in Caracas before we left, and And of course, our story was completely opposite what the U.S. government was telling Americans at that time. So I've got news for people. The U.S. government's been lying to people for a long, long time. This didn't start with with Jimmy Carter, so or Richard Nixon. So anyway, we got this audience, and Drew Pearson was. He said, "Well, I can't do anything here right now. I'm not even in the U.S." But he said, "I'll do what I can for you when I get home." And so, of course, we got on the ship and came back to the U.S. And we were here a couple of months, and and the Venezuelan embassy called, and we went to Washington D.C. And what had happened was Drew Pearson, again, remember this would be equivalent to somebody like Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson of that day. When he got back to the U.S., faithful to his word, he called up the Venezuelan ambassador. And he said, I visited the Salatins and I've got their story. And if you don't give them a settlement for taking their farm away that they paid for, I'm going to feature them as on my next week's broadcast, and Venezuela will not get one more dollar of U.S. foreign aid.
Wow.
Well, they quickly caved. The embassy caved, called us. We went up there. They gave us. It was not 100% by any means, but for Dad, it was at least it was at least a a mea culpa. It was we didn't treat you right. We didn't take care of you. And with that little check, we bought our first little herd of cows. But that so what I'm getting at is our experience there taught us to never trust the government. It doesn't matter what kind it is. Never trust the government. Number two, most governments are lying. Number three, U.S. foreign aid is a crock. All of it, all U.S. foreign aid is a crock. The fact that our country gives any other country a dime is criminal, in my view. And finally, wow, the power of the press. When you have transparency in the press, the power of uncensored information in the press to actually right the wrongs of society by shining the light of truth on it. And so those three things we grew up. I mean, I grew up reading the Foundation for Economic Freedom, FEE, libertarian stuff. I mean, that came in right along with Mother Earth News and organic gardening, And so I grew up in this wonderful world of libertarian environmentalism. And I just thought that was natural, Wouldn't libertarians not want to use chemicals? I mean, it just seemed pretty normal. And it was not until I became an adult that I realized, the libertarians are very anti-environment and very anti-ecology because they want to just dominate everything and say things like, well, sure, let's use up the earth and then let's go to Mars, and so this was such an interesting time, an interesting way to grow up, and I realize now how fortunate I was to have feet in those different kinds of camps, to give me a deep appreciation not only for how people think, but what all the different sides can contribute to an issue.
Yeah. No, you have an incredible insight to so many different elements, especially when it comes to understanding freedom and how quickly you can lose it. And people like you that are trying to work at securing the food system, because that's a huge feature that all the globalists and these
Sure.
technocracy folks, that's a big thing. People don't want to hear it and they don't want to talk about it. And it's being censored quite a bit. I've been censored myself for a lot of this stuff that you're talking about, because I like to try to get down to freedom being the fundamental thing that we're all oriented towards, hopefully.
Sure.
But like you said, the institutions have been hijacked since post-World War II, and I feel like the war never ended. It just became a psyop. And our CIA and the Mossad and all of these different intelligence agencies began to get into the colleges and the education system. And I've been sort of following a little basic high view thread of this for a while now. And it's so embedded that people are now so willing to give up their freedoms because they've been taught to, and they're so compliant and obedient. And I think people during the pandemic woke up. A lot of people started to realize how vulnerable we are and started questioning this. So I think it actually worked out to some slight degree, to where we have a little hope that people might start questioning the government.
Yes, there's no question in my mind that 2020 um, awakened a sleeping giant. There were a lot of people asleep at the wheel who, for the first time, realized that these major institutions, both public and private, had agendas that were not friendly to freedom, even to health, and to ultimate individual flourishing, individual decision making, and so that was a that was a powerful move. I mean, it catalyzed homeschooling has doubled since then, and now I think a morphing of 2020, I think certainly is the Maha movement, which is informed consent. I mean, how many? I never heard that phrase 5 years ago. Informed consent. It was around. It's been used for a long time, but now everybody knows the term informed consent, whether you agree with it or not. The idea of informed consent is profound, and the fact that American food has 10,000 additives in it. European food only has 400. And the whole, I mean, it just seems like every week there's a new breaking story on some sort of corruption, collusion, or dysfunction within the system. Whether it's the Tylenol autism connection, you know, whatever it is, it's we're still taking those peels off the onion. We're still undoing the onion and getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And of course, you got the Epstein files, and I'm a great friend of Congressman Thomas Massey, and that guy is just he is a pit bull, and and is hanging with it. So yeah, we see it. We see a lot of unraveling, and that's one reason why the most common phrase I hear when I'm out, speaking at presentations, people come up and say, "I just want to disentangle. I just want to. How do I disentangle?" And it's like more and more of us are feeling like our finances, our education, our media, our healthcare, our food system, it's tangled in this terrible web of deceit, corruption, and cheating. And how do we disentangle from it? And that's one of the things that's driving the homestead movement. People are fleeing the cities in droves and getting their little, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 acre spot, and at least they can grow a garden and have a pantry full of food, and and this is symptomatic of that whole thing. And the alternative healthcare. I mean, I don't know a single person who the medical establishment would call a quack. From acupuncture to chiropractor to iridology to functional medicine, homeopathy, naturopathy. Um, I don't know a single one that's not busy. Everyone that I encounter, I say, how are you? Are you? Oh, I'm covered up. I'm busy. People are flocking away from conventional think. If we just say conventional think, people are dropping out of it, and it's a revolution that's wonderful to behold.
Yeah. What do you think about, because I know you're in communication with RFK and him, I've heard you mention switching the regulatory process and adding more and more of that, and these institutions, like I even saw Trump yesterday just team up with the head of like Pfizer and all these mRNA technology folks and still funding it. So I think people are starting to get away from, hopefully, thinking that these guys are going to save us. Maybe they are, maybe there is some good in that, but fuck, man, stop thinking that like
Yeah,
finally we got someone in office. It's like, well, that's only for 4 years. And even
yeah,
if that guy did have good intentions and wasn't compromised, which they are, do you really think that the government's going to save you? No, we need to figure this out and question the whole system is completely
yeah,
embedded with corruption.
yeah, yeah. You're exactly right. And Trump. Well, look, I'll be transparent here. I'm happier that Trump is in there than Kamala Harris. I mean, I'll just say that for what it's worth. But there are a lot of things that I vehemently disagree with that Trump is doing. I mean, um, uh, mRNA is one. Yeah, those COVID shots are still wreaking havoc on the health of Americans who took the jab. Still wreaking havoc. What will it take for Trump to come to the microphone and say, you know what, America, I'm sorry. Uh, that warp speed thing, it actually was a bad thing. And I funded it and I did it and I'm sorry. Wouldn't it be great if he would step up to the microphone and do that? But no, instead, he's doubling down on it. As you said, continuing to fund it and cavorting with the executives that brought it to us. So that's dispiriting. And the of course there are these efforts now to absolve the chemical companies of liability, like the vaccine companies were absolved of liability. That which all the vaccine concerned folks. I'm not going to say anti-vaxxers, but the folks that are questioning that everybody should have whatever it is 70 vaccines before they're 18. The folks who dare to question that narrative are have a dear President Ronald Reagan to thank. Reagan and Teddy Kennedy are the ones that put together that vaccine liability exemption, which then made the vaccine industries go bonkers. And now the same thing is trying to be done. Bayer, a la Monsanto, is pushing to get the same thing done for chemicals that the EPA says are okay. If the EPA says the chemical is okay, then there's no corporate liability for it. And so, of course, that will give a free ride to the chemical companies, just like the vaccine companies. And so, I'm seeing this develop. And by the way, that is being pushed by the Republicans. That's being pushed by the Republicans. And then you have these other elements with that are a little more nuanced within the system, from food regulations. North Carolina is trying to put the kibosh on herd share for raw milk to eliminate that. That again is being pushed by Republicans, and then you have this whole National Guard in the big cities. I don't know where I get sideways with you, but I'm opposed. Look, these cities, they built their bed, let them lie in it. Let them implode. If
Yeah.
Chicago collapses, let it collapse. Who cares? I don't. I mean, I care, but it's not my responsibility to go in and save a bunch of people that voted in a bunch of yin yangs and can't govern their city, to go in there with my taxpayer dollar and save them from their stupidity. Let them collapse. And when they get bad enough, people will say, well, maybe these progressive woke libs aren't the best governance for us. And they'll start putting somebody else in. And shooting boats out of the water in the Caribbean, bringing in. I don't like fentanyl any more than anybody else, but a government that can tell you you can't take fentanyl can also tell you you can't drink raw milk. And
Yeah.
so I'm for the legalization of everything, but that also means the elimination of all government involvement in all healthcare, welfare, and safety netting. So if you want to go, blow your brains out with fentanyl, fine. Go ahead. It rids society of weak in the gene pool. That's just basic. It's it sounds. What's more terrible than that? What's more terrible than that is stealing hard-earned money from you and me and inflating the money supply, destroying the middle class, and and giving the money to people who aren't um, who who won't make good decisions for themselves. The only way that you get a society to develop discernment muscles, and discernment is a muscle, the way you get people to develop discernment muscles is to make them responsible for the decisions they've made. As soon as you take away decision making, the consequences of decision making, you get really, really terrible decisions.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think this whole military in the cities thing, and everybody's praising it like finally, and they've created these operations, and that's why they were funding all of these ideologies in the cities that we're talking about to then create some government overreach. It happened with 9/11, it happened with COVID, and everybody gets on board with these regulatory processes. And it's like, okay, what about in 5 years when they come and send the military to force you to get the jab? Or send the military to force your kids to take whatever it is they want them to take. So I'm a fan of less government, the better. I'm just wondering how we can get further into a decentralized system with how far things have gotten with these giant corporations and the the technocracy that's been developed. It's now gone beyond the United States and China and Russia. It's gone to like this technocracy, if you want to call it that. And you can tell that the big funders, the people in power, are the technology companies, and they are the ones driving the narrative. And I think the reason people aren't willing or able to take responsibility and have discernment is because they're so distracted. They're using the weapons of mass distraction, the cell phones, the apps and all of this stuff, and people are just willing to give up their freedoms, almost like the Brave New World scenario that Huxley wrote about.
Ha! Well, as I was taking my notes as you were going on to give myself some little cheat sheet stuff here. I just wrote Brave New World because if you think about that book, Brave New World, Huxley, that was, when was that written? 1930. It was in the 30s, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then he revisited it, wrote a revised version, and said, "I couldn't believe it's happening faster than I thought." In the
Yeah.
50s, I believe. I think in the
Okay.
50s he rewrote it with a new
Yeah.
revised. The revised version's even better.
Okay. Well, I guess I read the original, but anyway, what one of the things that so fascinated me reading that actually recently was the whole goal of the society was to distract people. You went to work, and then you went to theater, or you watched TV, or you went to the show or something, but it was everything was constructed so people didn't have time to think. It was
Yep.
all about occupying their minds so they wouldn't think. Now, Huxley did not envision TikTok. He did not envision social media. That was not on his radar. But he understood from a social control a social control strategy. He understood the need to keep people occupied with trivialities in order for them not to actually sit and think and contemplate things. And so I think you're exactly right. I think that our TikTok culture has literally shut down critical thinking to where, and if anybody dares to think critically, then they get deplatformed or censored because that's misinformation. You can't, and we've got these, colleges now have these, they've got to be safe places, right? You got to protect the students um, from unsettling thoughts, and so but as if they're not getting any unsettling thoughts from their social feeds and their cell phones. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. And so then the question, you pose the question, how do you get more decentralized? Well, I think there's two schools of thought on this, and this is kind of where there is a political school of thought that says the ultra socialists and ultra libertarians, it's not a linear thing. It's actually a circle. And at some point they meet, you know. And so, for example, Bernie Sanders and AOC are traveling the country saying, we got to stop the oligarchy, got to stop the oligarchy. You know, that's Bernie Sanders. And the truth is, we do have an oligarchy. I mean, 4 companies control 85% of America's meat supply. I mean, that's the definition of an oligarchy. And so I'm with him on that. But his solution is, well, we need a bigger government agency. We need to activate antitrust and get, you know, all this Federal Trade Commission involved. And we need a bigger bully government than, you know, than the big oligarchy. Well, Ryan, that's what we've been trying to do, hasn't it, for a century? That's what we've been trying for a century, and we've got more consolidation, more centralization, more control than we've ever had before. So there's a completely opposite side. Let's agree. How do we stop the power of the oligarchy? One is creating a bigger bully government than the oligarchy. We've tried that; it doesn't work. So here's my suggestion. The other side of this is, how do we free up grassroots entrepreneurs to chip away in the marketplace against these oligarchs? And that's where I've come to to promote. My idea is a food emancipation proclamation. And the food emancipation proclamation would give anyone the right to transact a food transaction without asking the government's permission. If you're my neighbor and you want to come over and say, "Hey, man, you make a fantastic chicken pot pie. Would you make 3 for me? I've got you know, cousins coming next week. I don't have time to cook for them. Would you make me 3 of your pot pies for, you know, I'll pay you $20 a piece, and I'll have great food for my company, and you know, and you'll get a little side hustle and some income." I can't sell that to you. I can't do it without an inspected kitchen, a HACCP plan, separate bathroom, you know, a whole plethora of infrastructure regulations surrounding a chicken pot pie for you as a neighbor. Here we are, 2 consenting adults acting in voluntary freedom of choice to choose our microbiome provenance and give it agency. I'm using these powerful words, phrases, and we have to actually get on bended knee and ask a bureaucrat if we can do this or not. It's inhuman. It's anti-human to put that requirement on people. And so, you know, I'm not asking to be free to sell to Walmart or ship to Vietnam or whatever. I am saying, if we as 2 neighbors want to engage in a food transaction, we should be able to do so without asking the government's permission. We've got choice in the bedroom, choice in the bathroom, choice in the womb, but we don't have choice in the kitchen. And this is not about food safety, Every other hazardous substance in our country, you know, whether it's prescription drugs, methamphetamine, cocaine, fentanyl, whatever, the prohibitions are across the board. You can't buy it, you can't sell it, you can't use it, you can't give it to your kids, and you can't give it away. There's a prohibition across the board on these things. And again, I'm not going to argue whether we should have that or not. I'm just saying that that's the way it is. But in food, the prohibition is only on one side of the ledger. You can buy it, you can give it away, you can eat it, you can give it to your children, you just can't sell it. So if raw milk is really unsafe, you shouldn't be able to use it, give it away, give it to your kids, or buy it. But you know, nobody, if you can find a farmer to sell it to you, or the chicken pot pie I was just describing, or homemade charcuterie, you know, or any of these other regulated foodstuffs, if you can find somebody to sell it to you, the government will never come after you for buying it, using it, giving it to your kids. The only person they come after is the person selling it. So it's clearly a control of market access it's not a food safety issue.
Exactly. Same thing with drugs. It's all of these things where they say it's about your safety, but if it was, it wouldn't look the way that it looks. It's all about making money and ownership and control. And I would love to go into, if you don't mind, because you have an incredible insight to how we got here as far as the pharmaceutical industries and the food industries being so entangled and creating incentivizations that are so nefarious. And the incentivization structure is what's driving it. If you always follow the money, you see where everything leads to. So if you don't mind speaking to some of the history of how this nefarious incentivization structure was developed and how we could maybe uncouple from that.
Yeah, well, the end of the incentivization grew out of a general request, if you will, a societal request for intervention. You see, what happened when the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker were embedded in a village long time ago? Everybody knew who the scofflaws were. I mean, they knew who the dirty ones were, the clean ones were. In fact, before the Flexner report in whatever 1914, 15, funded by the Rockefellers, before that, medical colleges were primarily individual oases developed by guru doctors who had figured out a cure for something. And so at that time, most of the medical training it was all private in a private sector, but it followed the gurus of the day. Well, this guy's got a cure for tuberculosis. This guy's got a cure for this, and so they would these gurus would glum up a clientele. People would read their articles and, oh yeah, I'd like to go learn from this guy. And it was all in the private sector. Well, that's the way the food was too. And but as the Industrial Revolution developed, the butcher, baker, and the candlestick maker became too big, to be embedded in a village, and they became hidden behind razor wire and guard posts. And when you start hiding a sector of the economy, then what happens is people start wanting to look over the fence and say, hey, I want a bully partner to look over the fence and protect me from what might be going on the other side of that fence. And so people ask for the Food Safety Inspection Service. They ask for the American Medical Association. They ask for the FDA. This is all part of that, of the butcher, baker, candlestick maker coming out of the private sector and out of the village context and becoming industrialized behind a veil of opaqueness that created paranoia and fear in the heart of the consuming populace, who no longer associated and could see behind the curtain of the stage. Well, what people didn't realize, Ryan, the big crazy thing that happened was the bully became the bed partner. People thought the government would come in and be the big bully, and what happened was the bureaucracy went to bed behind the guard tower, backstage. All right, I mean, it sounds kind of crude to say it that way, but I don't know how better to explain what happened. All right, so and that leads us to the agency capture that RFK Jr. talks about, to the revolving door we all know about. And it happens in every single government institution, from education to finance to drugs to farming to food to everything. And what's interesting now is that the internet has democratized the information to be able to see behind that curtain. So I'll give you an example. Uber, Uber, if 50 years ago somebody came up to you and said, hey, you're going to go to Calcutta and you're going to jump into a car that doesn't have a taxi thing on top, and with a driver that's never been to, a special school, and say, take me to, the museum, and you're going to trust him to do that without any government oversight whatsoever, you'd have said, "What? You're nuts! I'm waiting for a taxi. I'm waiting for the guy that's really the kosher deal." And what made Uber possible was the internet with real time vetting, real time authentication. If you're a bad passenger, you don't get a ride. If you're a bad driver, you don't get a passenger. Airbnb, another example. In 10 years, Airbnb, without any government oversight whatsoever, Airbnb doubled the hospitality capacity of Marriott, Sheraton, and Hilton. In other words, you take all the rooms globally of Marriott, Sheraton, and Hilton, double those rooms, and they did it in 10 years without pounding a nail. I mean, that's incredible. That's the power of democratized information. And so what we have now is we had this industrial proliferation, which created an industrial bureaucracy. Now that industrial paradigm is fragmenting due to the democratization of information, but the industries, they like they like their opaqueness, all right, and so they are doing everything possible to make sure that Uberization doesn't come to food and pharmaceuticals and healthcare and all that sort of thing. I mean, you go into the hospital for a procedure. What hospital tells you here's how much it'll cost? They never tell you. You go in and you blind faith, and so here we are with this tension in our society as the butcher, baker, and candlestick maker industrialized and became opaque and built this industrial oversight bureaucracy to supposedly protect people. Now we know the emperor doesn't have any clothes, but that collusive, perverse incentive, in bed together model, the government doesn't want to break it up. Industry doesn't want to break it up. Business doesn't want to break it up. So the only way it can be broken up is by giving people freedom on the entrepreneurial level to bring competition to the marketplace. That's the only way it ultimately can be broken up. And it's kind of a long answer. Sorry to go on so long, but I hope that helps to help people to understand how we got here and why asking for additional government agency oversight ultimately can't actually solve the problem. It can only be solved by a grassroots revolution that enables competition within the marketplace.
No, it's amazing. And I'd love to hear your description of the Flexner report and the Rockefellers being tied to petroleum industry and some of that. But I would also like to add that we can't untangle or uncouple or decentralize if we don't preserve our freedom of speech, that First Amendment. And that's what's being really attacked right now, because this kind of conversation will be shadow banned and censored. And if we don't have that ability to have conversations and storytelling and understand, there is no discernment, there is no freedom.
Right.
And that's the number one thing they're attacking right now.
Yeah. Just imagine, Ryan, if tomorrow there was a rule that said no longer because giving a bad review to a passenger or a driver in Uber is close to hate speech. I mean, somebody might just have their nose out of joint. It's probably a racist thing. Who knows? They just got some ethnicity thing. They didn't like the driver, didn't like the passenger, whatever. So we're not going to allow any feedback. We're not going to allow that feedback loop. Well, Uber would be out of business tomorrow. The whole thing, the whole idea depends on the free flow of of language to certify beliefs, to certify
Yeah,
what people think. And so, yeah, you're right. So if we take that idea and run it out into other spheres of culture, we realize that the only way to move any other social cultural sector to a to a a liberty minded place, the foundation is the ability to say what you want to say.
exactly. I think that's foundational, because if you don't like me or you don't like my business, don't come here, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe we could go into a little bit of your vision for the future as far as food goes, and ways that individuals, even if they're not farmers, can start to make those shifts. And then people that do want to get interested in creating, grassroots movements in their towns. What are some of the practical solutions that you've come up with that you could share with people that you've discovered over the time?
Yeah. So let's start with the easiest one. The easiest one is simply to defund the scofflaws. What are the scofflaws? So they're the folks that are making ultra processed convenience foods that you can't make in your kitchen. This is what RFK Jr. is unpeeling as so many health problems. And so you if there's something on the label that you can't pronounce, don't eat it, don't buy it, and don't fund the people who do. What does that mean? So the number one thing that you can do if you want to shake up the food system, A, don't buy any fast food. B, cook from scratch. Now, I can hear the groans. Oh no, you mean I've got to buy a whole chicken? I've got to buy a squash. I've got to buy a whole potato. But the the processed food industry in the last 80 years, the farmer's share of the retail dollar has dropped from 50 cents 50 cents of the dollar to 8 cents of the dollar. So this is being eaten up by the processed food industry. So the number one thing you can do to affect the money and your health is to get out of the convenience food business. And it's never been easier to practice domestic culinary arts. I mean, we've got Instapot, crock pots, hot and cold running water, refrigerators, timed bake, ice cream makers, bread makers. I mean, we've got all sorts of techno gadgets. We've never had so much sophistication in our kitchens and been more ignorant as to how to use them. And so, we're not talking about spending, 10 hours in the kitchen like great great grandma did. Um, we're talking about my land. So, one of our favorite meals is you throw some meat, potatoes, carrots, onions in a crock pot, walk off, at 7 o'clock, leave it, and you come back at 5 o'clock and dinner's served. It took 40 watts of power all day, less than a watt light bulb, and sat there and just bubbled all day. And if you eat early, it's ready. If you eat late, it's not dry. It's always ready. And so, to me, that's the ultimate convenience dinner. I mean, you don't even have to you don't even have to thaw the meat. It'll thaw as it's in the crock pot. So there are a lot of things that you can do that will defund these big food conglomerates that are taking the nutrition out of our food and are putting toxicity into the food. And so just quit patronizing them. Number two, find your source, find your farmer. You can do that on websites. I mean, shameless plug, we ship nationwide. If you want really clean meat, poultry, eggs, we ship nationwide. And it's never been cheaper. we can actually, right now, Ryan, you're going to love this. Right now, we can ship eggs to Baltimore, eggs to any city pretty much in the U.S. cheaper than they can buy them at farmers market. Well, why?
That's crazy.
Well, because these dysfunctional urban centers are so regulated, so crime ridden, and so taxed that doing business in those areas is so expensive that it's actually cheaper to do business 300 miles away and ship it by UPS to your doorstep than it is for a business to try to get into the city and do business. You know, smash and grab and all this stuff that's going on. You know, it's just too expensive to do business in these imploding, dysfunctional urban, blue urban centers. And so it's, good quality food has never been more available than it is now. And so just put some attention on it. The biggest lie we tell ourselves is, I want a different world, but I don't want to change anything I'm doing. And if we want a different world, we've got to change something we're doing. And so if we want a world where, Doritos and Coca-Cola aren't the biggest, food items in the culture, then we have to quit buying Coca-Cola and Doritos. It's just that simple. And so, so that's where I am. The number one thing is, is to change your menu to a direct line, as direct as you can get, straight to a farm, cut out the middleman, cut out the processing, cut out all the convenience, and use the kitchen you already have, and enjoy the texture, the taste, the smells of domestic culinary arts, and you'll save a lot of money. Right. I mean, look, I was in the store the other day. I mean, I've never bought a Lunchable. I saw Lunchables at the meat counter, and of course it's half bread, and I'm looking at that thing, and Lunchables, they're $14 a pound. $14 a pound. Look, you can buy a pound and a half of our world-class, hormone-free, GMO-free, grass-finished ground beef for that price. So you're not saving money buying convenience. You're not saving money at all. Where you save money is buying whole foods, and I don't mean the brand Whole Foods. I mean buy, ingredients, and actually, make the food yourself. And that defunds Cargill, it defunds Tyson, it defunds these outfits, especially, when you make an end run around and buy directly from a farmer.
Yeah. And then the amount of money people don't include in this narrative that you would be paying for your health issues. You can go, people say, well, if you're poor, you can't eat healthy, but they don't include all of the other, how much it's going to cost to be chasing doctors and on pharmaceuticals. And I've even been on patients as a first responder in 20 years where you see people that the insurance company will cover someone who's 600 pounds and they're laying in a bed next to their microwave and their Hot Pockets. And the doctor will tell them to eat 7 small meals a day, and they're listening to their doctor. And then the insurance company will pay for a remodeling of their front door so you can expand it and build a cement ramp so they can get in that little mobile thing that pushes them around. And so all of the incentives are driving bad behavior. And again, it goes into people don't want to take responsibility. And we've created this social safety net. We've outsourced our freedom and our thinking to some deity or some government that's going to save you.
Yep. Exactly right. And so when you start looking at nutrition and ultimate health outcomes, I mean, this is why the government should not be involved in healthcare at all. If you and I had to pay for our healthcare out of our own pocket, we'd start thinking about, well, I wonder if this is going to make me healthy or not. But we're Ryan, we're so far removed from that. You almost can't even have that discussion without, knives coming out. That's some sort of a horrendous idea that we would actually have personal responsibility for our for our decisions. But the fact is that, if the government didn't take half of my income in taxes, I'd have a lot more money to be philanthropic. And I would love to be philanthropic, but it's hard to be philanthropic when half your income goes to taxes to pay people who are too dilatory to work. I mean, I've suggested, along with MAGA, Make America Great Again, which I think is, I'm not sure we've ever been as great as some people think we were, but that's another discussion. MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. I'm for MAWA, Make America Work Again. Quit giving it, making it possible for people to earn more money to not work than when they work. And my latest one is MARA, 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 Make Americans Responsible Again. Let's make Americans responsible again, MARA. So we need some MAWA and some MARA to go along with the MAHA, and we'd have a better country.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I love that. I wrote a couple things down. One of them was the vegan narrative and how people that use it as a form of virtue signaling, which whatever, do whatever you want. I'm all about freedom, but they say that they don't want to harm animals. But can you just go into some of the counterpoints that would describe how much of an environmental destructive component goes into being a vegan and processed foods, and how many lives are being taken just to be a vegan too?
Yeah, well, it's an incredibly anthropomorphic thing to say that veganism is actually, has a moral high ground over non-veganism, because what we know now is everything, all biology is sentient. We now know the fungus, the fungal roots in trees communicate with each other. We know that the acacia trees in the Serengeti communicate with each other through chemical pheromones. When the giraffes start nibbling on them, and they change their chemical component to become bitter, so the giraffes don't like them. It's a defensive mechanism. We know that in fact our microorganisms in our microbiome, even Stanford is isolated. They actually have a language. Our microbes are communicating with each other. The fact is that the entire cosmos is pulsing with sentience. Things they're dynamic, they're spontaneous, they're responding to each other. And so, if you think that's one idea. That it's incredibly prideful, I think, to say I'm going to be more concerned about a life that looks more like me than one that doesn't look more like me. No, it's all life. It's all life. Number two is, and this is foundational, everything is eating and being eaten. You cannot have life without death. This is the foundational principle of ecology. The sun shines, it grows plants. The plants grow, they're either eaten or digested or decomposed. And so you've got life, death, decomposition, regeneration, life, death, decomposition, regeneration. I mean, that's the cycle of life. And if you don't believe that everything's eating and being eaten, go lie naked in your flower bed for a week and see what gets eaten. Something will be eaten. And so the best example of this is a compost pile. A compost pile is a pile of living things that decompose, and then they're regenerated in new life, providing energy for a tomato plant or corn or grass or whatever. So the fact that something has to be sacrificed in order for something to live is perhaps one of the most foundational ecological principles there are. And if you think that somebody's not killing the bugs and killing the slugs and the beetles on your cabbage and kale, you haven't examined this very far. And even the plowing to grow the corn and the soybeans, or the herbicides to grow that, to make your tofu and make your vegan burgers, is actually killing way more beings. It's actually killing way more beings than a cow on a pasture where there is no plowing and there is a plethora of wildlife and butterflies and pollinators and no tillage. There's actually far more life in a perennial prairie pasture than there is a monoculture crop field. And the only thing that dies there at the human hand is the cow. And so it's one individual compared to millions of individuals if you're eating vegan. And so if you want to talk about how many individuals are we killing, the vegan actually destroys way more individuals than the one that's eating a more nutrient dense, higher on the food chain, king of the food chain, in a more carnivore setting. So the whole idea that we can have life without death does not indicate a grasp of a new higher spiritual plane. Haven't we gone beyond this? No. It's actually indicative of a profound devolution and disconnection to our ecological umbilical and what it actually takes to make ecology go around.
Right. Yeah, the denial of death is we're in a death phobic culture, and even the technocrats, these people that are glorifying technology, the transhumanists, I think their big push is to upload consciousness. They have no connection with the earth. They're like anti-human, anti-nature. And a lot of the stuff that when you just look at biology, like you were saying, the soil and the complexity of the microbes and the mycelium and how it just is the opposite of centralization. And so is our microbiome, and so is all of life. It's a decentralized process. But what we've created with this evolution of technology and this prioritization of linear thinking and just looking at nature as something to be harnessed or to take over, like we're separate from it, is how we seem to have gotten here as a foundational misunderstanding of our relationship to life.
Well, absolutely, and it also indicates. I'm glad you used the term linear, because what has happened essentially since Justice von Liebig in 1837 told the world that all of life is simply a rearrangement of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. NPK, 1837. That was the first time in human history that something supernatural wasn't attributed to life. Up until that time, there was everything from God to paganism to gods to there was something beyond physical regarding life. That 1837 edict by Justice von Liebig, which of course launched the chemical fertilizer revolution, that for the first time took anything physical out of life and created a mechanistic. This is where I'm going. Your linear reductionist thinking. It created a mechanical view of life, and so life is now just a bunch of widgets, and we can insert and take out DNA. We can it's essentially like a car, and if we can just find the clunky bearing, we can fix the car, and right now the soil has about 4.5 billion with a B billion microbes per handful, and we only know what 10% of them are. We've only named 10%, and we only know what 10% do. So 90% of the microbes in the soil are still unnamed and unknown as to contribution. That should bring us all to a place of humility, if you will, in the sight of this, rather than hubris.
Yeah, that seems to be the big feature missing in our culture is humility and the awe and the wonder and the curiosity. And there's a lot of people that say trust the science, and you're like, well, science is actually a living process of thinking and skeptically interrogating the world
Right.
around you and constantly re-upping and letting go of information that
Yes.
you have that's
Yes.
wrong. It's not some religious ideology, which is what it's
Right.
become, you
Right.
know.
Right. I mean, look at what we know that we now know is not true. I mean, everything from a flat Earth to the Earth revolves around the sun to you know to microbes and other things. I mean, uh, we know now things that previous people groups knew. You know, if you'd had a discussion with them, well, I know this, and we know now that it's simply not true. And and so, you know, we've seen. I mean, look at. I mean, even in recent days. I mean, uh, the movement in our own country toward, for example, um, margarine. We got to get rid of lard and butter, and we got to go to hydrogenated vegetable oils. Well, now, guess how many hydrogenated vegetable oils it's okay to eat? Zero. You know, zero recommend, and that was for whatever 50 years. That was the official recommendation. The food pyramid in 1979, the food pyramid put Cheerios and Cocoa Puffs, you know, on the bottom, and it looks like RFK Jr. is going to turn that a little bit on its head, but you know, antimicrobial soaps. I mean, they only lasted for whatever 5 or 6 years until we realized, ooh, we're over sterilizing here. We need these microbes, and of course, you know, look at Anthony Fauci, what he said. You know, stepping up to the microphone, and we now know that virtually 95% of what he said was a complete lie. It was a completely fabrication, and and so yeah, I mean, it was as smart as we are still um, we are still learning. You know, a year after, oh, what I thought last year wasn't correct.
Yeah, and that's the problem with our scientific community has been captured by the centralized model, going back to what you said, the Flexner report, and how petroleum and all these industries capture the way that the scientific data can be used to persuade people to create a new market that then also creates a new regulatory agency to then get double the income. It seems like regulatory agencies and markets are all intertangled with
Yeah,
lies and incentives to
right.
keep it as a constant hamster wheel,
That's
you
right.
know?
That's right. Yeah.
And climate change is the new thing that they're using to create new industries, regulatory processes, and to create government overreach. And that's probably going to be to our detriment because what they're doing is they've realized through all the different psychological warfare tactics, the best one you can use is virtue signaling and to create the
Right.
good guys versus the bad guys.
Yeah.
And we saw that with COVID. You know, we started to create this division, and I'm doing it to protect you. Can you talk a little bit about how this climate change narrative is going to be used and is being used for government overreach?
Well, sure. I mean, we're already seeing the move of some restaurants to create um, segregated eating rooms for people who eat meat. You know, like the smoke free and smoke. You know, back in the day when they started putting the smokers all in a separate room, and we're starting to see that kind of segregation. And it's you're exactly right. It's the virtue signaling. It's you know, we can't associate with those people, and so you have this this kind of anathema concept within the culture. And so yeah, the climate change narrative is totally anti livestock, and and so you have to understand that 500 years ago there were more animals on the planet than there are today. So clearly, this is not about animals; it's other things. And you know, my big problem with the climate. I mean, I've got several problems, but one is that when you run the computers backwards, we'd all be frozen to death by now if you run them backwards. So until the models run backwards as well as forwards, I don't trust them at all. And it's all just modeling, and it doesn't take into account many of the of the nuances. There's a new book coming out called Mootopia, Moo for cows, Mootopia, and how cows can save the planet and heal everything. And it's just fabulous. But it goes into even the plus and minus charges on soil and atmosphere, and it's just amazing. But the vegetation requirement to um, to exude the bacteria for condensation for cloud formation. And the problem with veganism is that it grows crops instead of perennials, and crops don't exude the bacteria that perennials do in a prairie situation. And so you're moving toward a drought cycle. In order for veganism to work, you have to go to a desertification climate model, and they don't even think about that, because monocultures never exude as much bacteria for condensation and cooling as perennial forages in a prairie situation. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but be assured that the climate change, the climate narrative. Uh, I mean, does the climate change? Absolutely. The Earth warms and cools and warms and cools. We know we had a cold snap from 1800 to 1825, very very cold. Um, and we you have the little ice age. You have these cycles. I mean, back in the bubonic plague, that was a little ice age. And so you have warming and cooling and warming and cooling. And I think we've just become too smart for our own good.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have this technocratic ability to create geoengineering, which people don't want to discuss, but there is a lot of that happening. So we can't even trust that this stuff isn't manufactured to some degree. Another subject that'll be highly censored. But anyway, I would love to ask you what some of your biggest inspirations have been, people, books, to think differently and to be the person that you've been. And what would you recommend for people to read to start thinking more critically?
Oh wow! So on money, on the financial system, probably The Creature from Jekyll Island is probably about as good as you can do. Uh, that will protect you for the rest of your life from ever trusting the government. The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's a fantastic book about the economy, how the economy finances work. Um, for farming, agriculture, I think my book, The Sheer Ecstasy of Being a Lunatic Farmer, is in that I've tried to capture with a lot of humor, um, good farming versus bad farming, and and I think it's important to have a general understanding of, well, what does a good farm look like? What does a bad farm look like? What are the characteristics of a good farm versus a bad farm? And so that's a really good one. Um, when it comes to um, big cultural, Wendell Berry is hard to beat. The Unsettling of America. Unsettling of America was foundational for me in a very very broad cultural way to think about how I'd like to live, how I'd like our world to look. So those are just a couple of really really good ones.
Awesome. I thank you for sharing that. I love Wendell Berry. I've actually just been diving into his work recently. And I've had you for an hour and 20 minutes and you're a busy man. So I ask everybody, if you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world if you didn't have your internet, all of your websites, all of your books, and this was the last thing you could say?
Um, we are stewards on a pilgrimage. Ultimately, we don't own it. It's all God's stuff. And so, so take care of it as if it's not yours.
I love it. Man, it's been really fun chatting with you today. I know it was a bit different of a podcast, talking more about authoritarianism and things like that, but you have a lot of knowledge there.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. I wish I wish more people were interested in this. So thank you for digging into that and sharing the word. It's great to be able to tease those topics out. It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will be sure to link everybody to your website and
Yeah.
all of your
Good.
stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you, Ryan. Take care.
Yep. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.